The vultures circled in the scorching Arizona sky, their raspy calls piercing the silence as desert winds carried the copper scent of blood. Below them, staked to the hard-packed earth, a woman hung limply against her bindings. Her once copper-brown skin was now blistered and cracked from 3 days under the merciless Sunday. Ritualistic burn marks patterned her arms, and her parched lips had stopped begging for water. Nobody expected her to survive. That was the point of leaving her there to die. But they hadn't counted on Jake Harmon. The sound of his dun horse's hooves disappeared into the vastness as he rode the telegraph line, Winchester 73 across his saddle, Colt single-action army, 45 on his hip, the peacemaker that had settled more than one dispute in this lawless territory. At 43, Jake had killed enough men to recognize death's approach, and as he drew closer to the strange shape staked in the distance, that familiar copper tang filled his nostrils. Some men would have ridden on. Jake Harmon wasn't one of them. The afternoon heat rippled across the landscape, distorting the horizon into a shimmering mirage. Jake adjusted his worn cavalry hat, squinting against the glare as he examined the snapped telegraph wire. The storm 2 nights back had taken down a pole about 2 miles east, leaving Western Union customers without service. Not that there were many out here in this godforsaken corner of the Arizona Territory, 1,885. Sweat trickled down his weathered face, following creases earned through 15 hard years under the southwestern Sunday. His blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the landscape instinctively, the permanent squint of a man who'd survived by watching horizons. The salt and pepper mustache framed his mouth, moving slightly with each measured breath as he worked. His fingers, calloused and precise, spliced the copper wire with practiced efficiency. The war had taught him many things: how to kill, how to survive, how to live with the ghosts of men he'd sent to early graves. But it was the years after that had taught him patience. He tied his dun horse to a gnarled mesquite and climbed halfway up the pole, wrapping fresh copper around the broken connection. From this vantage point, he could see for miles: red rocks standing sentinel over emptiness, scattered cacti, and that endless blue dome that seemed to taunt a man with promises of rain it never delivered. This was his office now, far from Antietam and Gettysburg, where he'd served as a Union cavalry scout. Far from the screams of dying boys calling for mothers who would never hold them again. Something caught his eye, an unusual shape about 100 yards off, near a cluster of sun-bleached rocks. Jake narrowed his gaze. Not rocks, a person, tied to something. His heartbeat quickened, but his movements remained deliberate. 15 years in Apache country had taught him caution. He descended carefully, pulled the Winchester from its scabbard, and approached with the silence of a man who'd tracked both men and animals across hostile terrain. The closer he got, the worse it looked. A woman, native, Apache by her dress, had been tied to a wooden stake driven deep into the hard ground. Her head hung forward, long black hair falling across her face. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder, exposing skin blistered under the desert Sunday. Ritual burns marked her arms in patterns Jake recognized, not wounds meant to kill quickly, but to mark the condemned. Above her, 3 vultures circled in lazy spirals, waiting with the patience of scavengers who knew death was near. Jake checked all directions, rifle ready, scanning ridgelines and washes for movement. Finding someone staked out here meant Apache justice, and interfering with Apache justice meant trouble. At 43, Jake preferred avoiding trouble when possible, but the woman's chest rose with shallow, uneven breaths. She was alive. "Ma'am?" he said quietly, crouching beside her. No response. Unwanted images flashed: a patrol ambush near Fort Bowie in '76, arrows whistling through the air, the screams of horses and men. The Apache brave he'd shot at point-blank range, watching the light fade from eyes that had burned with hatred. He pushed the memories away. That was another life. The woman's eyelids fluttered, cracked lips parted, but no sound emerged. A movement on the ridge caught Jake's attention. 2 men on horseback, silhouetted against the sky. Apache warriors, rifles glinting in the Sunday one pointed in his direction. Jake didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he drew his Colt, cocked the hammer, and fired. The .45 caliber slug struck the first warrior center mass, the crack echoing across the empty landscape as the man tumbled from his horse in a spray of red mist. The second wheeled his mount around and galloped away before Jake could get off another shot. "God damn it all," Jake muttered, the taste of gunpowder acrid on his tongue. He holstered his weapon and drew the Arkansas toothpick from his boot, 8 inches of razor-sharp steel that had saved his life more times than he could count. He sliced through the rawhide bindings, noting the precision of the knots. This was no hasty execution. The woman collapsed into his arms, her body burning with fever, lighter than she should have been. Up close, he could see the burns, small, deliberate marks telling a story he couldn't read. "I've got you," he said, though he doubted she understood. "Let's get out of here before your friends return with company." He carried her to his horse, lifting her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. With one arm around her waist to keep her from falling, he turned toward the canyon where his cabin waited, 4 miles south. The dun knew the way home, picking its path down the rocky slope. "Stay with me," he murmured as they rode, feeling the heat radiating from her body. "Just stay with me." A lone coyote howled in the distance, its mournful cry following them across the endless desert. Jake pressed his heels into his horse's flanks, urging more speed. The warrior who'd escaped would be back, and he wouldn't come alone. Jake's cabin sat nestled in a narrow canyon, sheltered by high rock walls that glowed amber in the setting sunday. A year-round spring bubbled up through limestone, ensuring water even in the worst droughts. He'd chosen this location with a soldier's eye, defensible, with only one main approach. After surviving Shiloh and Cold Harbor, a man learned to sleep where he couldn't be easily surrounded. He'd built it solid. Thick pine logs chinked with mud and limestone, a stone chimney, shuttered windows that could be barred from inside. The roof was low but didn't leak. A small corral stood adjacent, currently empty except for his mule, which brayed a greeting as they approached. Jake dismounted, cradling the woman in his arms. Her breathing remained shallow but steady. He shouldered open the door and carried her inside, laying her gently on his bed against the far wall. The interior was sparse but meticulously organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Rifles and shotguns hung on racks beside the door, a Sharps .52 Buffalo gun, a 10-gauge Greener shotgun, and an assortment of handguns, with ammunition boxes stacked neatly below. A worn table and 2 chairs sat in the center, one chair dusty from disuse. Dried herbs and plants hung from the ceiling beams, alongside strips of jerky. A bookshelf held military histories, a Bible, a field medicine manual, and Shakespeare's works that had survived Shiloh in his saddlebag. Jake filled a tin cup with water and returned to the woman. Her eyes remained closed, but the rapid fluttering beneath her eyelids told him she wasn't fully unconscious. He lifted her head gently, bringing the cup to her cracked lips. "Drink," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Slow now." Her eyes opened briefly, dark as obsidian, clouded with confusion, before she sipped reflexively. After a few swallows, she coughed weakly. Jake assessed her condition with clinical efficiency. Severe dehydration, 2nd-degree sunburn, those strange marks, not cuts as he'd first thought, but burns in a pattern he didn't recognize. No gunshot wounds or broken bones. She'd survive, with proper care. Whether she'd want to was another matter. He cleaned her wounds with whiskey and a cloth, his movements precise. The woman flinched but made no sound. He applied a salve of plantain and yarrow, then covered her with a Navajo blanket. She watched him through half-closed eyes, tense as a wounded fox. "You're safe here," he said, knowing the words meant little from a white man to an Apache. "I'll be close." Jake stepped outside to secure the perimeter. The sun had slipped behind the western ridge, casting the canyon in shadow. He reset the warning system, tin cans strung on wire, and checked his traps. The Apache warrior who'd escaped would return with others. By nightfall, the woman was burning with fever. Jake soaked cloths in cool water from the spring and placed them on her forehead, wrists, and neck. He'd seen men die of fever after surviving grievous wounds. He stoked the fire, keeping it low but steady. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows, reminding him of nights watching campfires on campaign, knowing the enemy lurked just beyond the light. Near midnight, her eyes flew open. She bolted upright with surprising strength, shouting words he didn't understand. Her hands clawed defensively at invisible enemies. "Easy," Jake said, keeping his distance, hands visible. "You're safe here." She stared, breathing hard, eyes wild. Recognition slowly dawned, not of him, but of her situation. She glanced around, then down at her bandaged arms. "Water," she said in accented English, the word barely audible. Jake handed her the cup, noting the calluses on her fingers, not the hands of a woman who'd led an easy life. "Name's Jake Harmon," he said, keeping his voice level. "Found you out in the flats. You were tied to a stake." She drank before answering. "Nayeli," she said finally. "My name is Nayeli." "You speak English well," Jake observed. "Mission school," she replied, something dark flickering in her eyes. Before they sent me away." "Your people did this to you?" Jake asked, gesturing to her wounds. Nayeli's face hardened, vulnerability vanishing. "Not my people anymore." A sound from outside interrupted them, the faint jingle of warning bells. Jake moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Moonlight illuminated 5 mounted figures at the canyon entrance, 200 yards away. "Trouble," he said, reaching for his Winchester. "Stay down." He moved with practiced efficiency, checking his weapons. The Colt was fully loaded, as was the Winchester. A coach gun stood by the door, loaded with buckshot. Jake positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. "They've come for me," Nayeli said, voice flat. "Well, they ain't getting you," Jake replied, something hard settling in his chest, the familiar stillness before violence. "Can you shoot?" She shook her head. Jake pulled a Smith & Wesson Model 3 from a drawer and placed it beside her. "Point and pull if anyone gets through that door. It's already cocked." The Apache warriors approached cautiously, spreading out as they neared the cabin. "Professional," Jake noted. Not the usual raiding party. The lead rider carried a torch, not yet lit. Jake waited until the leader was within range. 100 yards, 75, 50. The Winchester cracked. The lead warrior tumbled from his horse, the torch falling. The others scattered, taking cover among the rocks. Gunfire erupted, bullets thudding into the cabin walls. Jake returned fire methodically, conserving ammunition. In the confined space, the gunshots were deafening. Acrid smoke filled the room. Through the gun smoke, he saw one warrior attempting to reach the back of the cabin. Jake pivoted, firing twice in rapid succession. The man fell and didn't move again. The remaining 3 retreated, dragging their wounded. Jake watched through the rifle sights until they disappeared beyond the canyon entrance. "They'll be back," he said, breaking open the rifle and reloading. "But not tonight." Nayeli sat rigid on the bed, the revolver clutched in white-knuckled hands. Her eyes, when they met his, held a question. "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Why help me? You know nothing about me." Jake considered the question as he checked the shutters. It was a fair question, one he'd asked himself. Man sees someone staked out to die. He's got 2 choices, he said finally, words coming slow. "Ride on or cut them loose. I made mine." He paused. "Been alone too long out here. Sometimes I forget what it means to be a man instead of just staying alive." The words surprised him as much as her. He hadn't spoken so openly to another person in years. As Nayeli drifted back to uneasy sleep, Jake sat in the chair by the window, rifle across his lap. The night passed slowly, marked by the hooting of an owl and distant coyotes. He didn't sleep. Sleep brought dreams, and his dreams had teeth. Over the next 3 days, Nayeli regained her strength with surprising speed. Jake kept watch for Apache raiders, but they didn't return. Not yet. The Apache were patient hunters. As she recovered, Jake learned her story during quiet evenings by the fire as he cleaned his weapons, and she slowly regained the use of her burned arms. "My village suffered sickness," she explained, staring into the flames. "Many children died. The elder said I brought bad spirits." "Why you?" Jake asked, running an oilcloth along the barrel of his sharps. "I spoke against the silver mine, said it poisoned our water." Her eyes hardened, reflecting the fire with intensity. "The agent from Washington promised money if our chief allowed the mining. When children began dying, they needed someone to blame." Jake's hands stilled. "The mine poisoned the water?" Nayeli nodded, touching the burns on her arm. "Mercury. They use it to pull silver from rock. It flows into the stream. The children who played there sickened first." "And the mining company?" "Silver Creek Mining." She spat the name like poison. "They know what they do. They pay government men to look away." Jake had heard of Silver Creek, Eastern investors who'd never set foot west of the Mississippi, the kind who saw land and people as resources to be used up and discarded. "So your people cast you out to die," Jake said, reassembling the rifle with practiced movements. "Not all wanted this," she replied, vulnerability flickering across her face. "But fear makes people cruel. The shaman said burning would purify me before death. Then they left me to die under Father Sunday." Jake nodded, understanding more than she might have guessed. He'd seen good men do terrible things when fear took hold. A sudden commotion outside drew their attention, the warning bells jangling urgently, followed by his mule braying in alarm. Jake grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. "Apache?" Nayeli asked, already reaching for the Smith & Wesson. Jake peered through the shutters. No, something else. He could make out shapes moving near the corral. Coyotes, perhaps, or mountain lions. A rifle shot cracked through the night. Jake ducked instinctively, then realized the shot came from further up the ridge. "White men," he muttered. "Stay here." He slipped outside, Winchester ready, moving silently along the shadow of the cabin wall. The moon was bright enough to see by. Two figures were approaching the cabin from different directions, using the rocks for cover. Jake waited until the closest was within 20 yards, then called out, "That's far enough." The figure froze. "Looking for Jake Harmon," a voice called back. "The telegraph man." "You found him. State your business." The man stepped forward slightly, keeping his rifle lowered. "Name's Pritchard. This here's Dawes. Silver Creek Mining Company sent us to find an Apache woman, paying good money, bounty hunters." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "Haven't seen any Apache except those trying to ventilate my cabin 3 nights back." "Mind if we look around?" Pritchard asked, taking another step forward. "I do mind," Jake replied, raising the Winchester slightly. "This is private property." A movement to his right caught his attention. The second man, Dawes, had used the conversation as cover to circle closer to the cabin door. "Your partner takes another step. He's dead," Jake called out. Dawes stopped, then grinned. "Just being friendly, mister. $200 is a lot of money for one Indian squaw." Before Jake could respond, a knife whistled through the air, burying itself in Dawes' chest. The man looked down in surprise, then collapsed. Pritchard swung his rifle toward the cabin, but Jake was faster. The Winchester roared, and Pritchard dropped where he stood. Nayeli emerged from the shadows beside the cabin, another knife ready. "There are 2 more," she said, scanning the ridge. "On horseback." Jake nodded and moved to the fallen men, checking their belongings. In Pritchard's pocket, he found a folded paper, a wanted notice with Nayeli's crude likeness. The reward was indeed $200, dead or alive, issued by Silver Creek Mining. "Bounty hunters," Jake muttered, handing her the paper, "hired by the mining company." Among Dawes' belongings was something else, a map showing Silver Creek's operations, including a planned expansion near the Apache Reservation's water source. "They're going to poison the entire tribe," Nayeli said, her voice tight with anger. "My people will die, even those who cast me out." Jake folded the map and tucked it into his shirt, The familiar cold knot formed in his stomach, the same feeling he'd had before every battle. "This goes beyond us now," he said. "We need evidence. I'm riding to Silverado tomorrow. I come with you." "Too dangerous. Those bounty hunters won't be the last." Her eyes flashed with an intensity that reminded him of a mountain lioness, beautiful, deadly, and utterly unafraid. "This is my fight, Jake Harmon." He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror. The need for justice or vengeance. Sometimes the line blurred until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "Stay here," he said finally. "Secure the cabin. If I don't return in 2 days, head north to Fort Apache. Ask for Captain Miller. Show him this map." As they dragged the bodies away, Jake watched Nayeli's efficient movements. She handled death with neither disgust nor satisfaction, just the practical efficiency of someone accustomed to its presence. It raised questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. That night, Jake dreamed of Sarah again, not dying this time, but as she'd been before the fever, laughing, her blonde hair catching sunlight as she hung laundry outside their Illinois farmhouse. In the dream, she turned to him with sad eyes. "It wasn't your fault, Jake," she said. "Let me go." He woke before dawn, the dream clinging to him. Across the room, Nayeli slept. One hand curled around the Smith & Wesson even in sleep. Jake watched her for a moment, wondering what dreams haunted her nights. Then he rose silently and began preparations for Silverado. Silverado wasn't much of a town, a wide dirt street flanked by false-fronted buildings pretending to be grander than they were. The Silver Nugget Saloon dominated the center, where miners spent wages on watered-down whiskey. The mining company's office dominated the north end, a 2-story affair with glass windows, the only prosperous-looking building in town. Jake left his horse at the livery, paying extra for good feed. If he needed to leave in a hurry, he wanted the dun rested. "Heading to the Silver Creek operation?" the livery owner asked, pocketing Jake's coins. "Nope. Telegraph business," Jake replied, adjusting his gun belt. He'd left the Winchester with his saddle, but kept the Colt on his hip. "You're the lineman from the canyon, ain't ya?" the livery owner persisted. "Heard some Apache tried to burn you out." Jake's eyes narrowed. News traveled fast. "Seems I'm getting famous," he said dryly. "Any other stories I should know about myself?" The man shrugged, suddenly interested in brushing Jake's horse. "Just talk. Folks say you took in some Indian woman. Company men were asking after her." "That's so?" Jake kept his voice casual, though his instincts were suddenly alert. "Town ain't friendly to Indian lovers these days," the livery owner warned quietly. "Silver Creek's got most folks on their payroll one way or another." Jake made his way to the saloon, figuring it the best place for information. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke. A piano player hammered out Buffalo Gals in the corner. He ordered whiskey and leaned against the bar, listening. 2 company men in clean shirts sat nearby, discussing business. "Contamination issues at the East Shaft," one was saying. "Mercury levels are too high for the men." "Blackwood wants it kept quiet," replied the other, a thin man with spectacles. "We can't afford another shutdown. The Eastern investors are already nervous after that newspaper article about the dead sheep downstream." Jake positioned himself to hear better. "What about the Apache problem?" the first man asked. "Being handled. Those bounty hunters should have found her by now." "And if they don't?" The spectacled man lowered his voice. "Blackwood's been talking to the territorial governor about relocating the entire tribe. Says they're an impediment to progress. The army won't move them without cause." A thin smile spread across the spectacled man's face. "Cause can be manufactured. These savages raid settlements all the time. One well-timed attack could be very useful." Jake had heard enough. He turned to leave and bumped into a large man with a silver company badge. "Watch yourself," the man growled. "My apologies," Jake replied, continuing toward the door. "Hold on." The guard squinted. "Ain't you that telegraph man, the one harboring that Apache witch?" "Just leaving, friend," Jake said, hand moving toward his Colt. "Not so fast." The guard grabbed his arm. "Mr. Blackwood would like a word with you." Jake drove his elbow into the guard's throat. As the man staggered backward, Jake drew his pistol. Two more company men rushed forward. Jake slammed the butt of his Colt into the first man's temple. The second managed to land a punch to Jake's ribs before Jake drove a knee into his groin. The saloon erupted into chaos. Jake fought his way to the door, using his pistol as a club rather than firing in the crowded room. Outside, he ran for the livery, bullets splintering the boardwalk at his heels. The livery owner pointed to where his dun was already saddled. Jake swung into the saddle in one fluid motion. "Which way's the mining office?" he asked, checking his Colt. "North end, 2-story white building, but they'll kill you if you go there now." Jake spurred the dun into a gallop toward the mining company office. If he was going to risk his life, he might as well make it count. He approached from the rear, knocked out a guard with one punch, and slipped inside. On the second floor, he found the records room locked. Using his Arkansas toothpick, he worked the lock open. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls. Jake found a drawer labeled Water Management containing maps, reports, and correspondence. One document made his blood run cold, a physician's report detailing mercury poisoning in children from the reservation, marked Confidential Destroy after reading. Attached was a memo instructing that this matter be handled with discretion to avoid legal complications. Another file contained correspondence with territorial officials, including substantial campaign contributions to the governor. A third held expansion plans that would funnel more toxic waste into the reservation's water. Jake stuffed the damning documents into his shirt and turned to leave. Hearing voices, he pressed himself against the wall beside the door. A clerk entered. Jake slipped past before the man realized what was happening. He moved quickly down the hall toward a window, hearing shouts behind him as the clerk discovered the open files. Jake kicked out the window glass and jumped, landing hard on an awning below, which tore under his weight. Pain shot through his ankle, but he pushed it aside. A bullet whined past as he rounded the corner. 3 company men were running toward him, guns drawn. Jake fired twice, dropping one, forcing the others to dive for cover. He sprinted across the street, ignoring the fire in his ankle. He was nearly to his horse when fire erupted in his left arm. The impact spun him half around, but he kept moving, swinging into the saddle one-handed. Blood soaked his sleeve as he galloped out of town. He took a circuitous route back to the canyon, stopping once to roughly bandage his wound. The bullet had passed through the flesh of his upper arm, missing the bone. Painful, but not life-threatening if kept clean. When he reached the cabin, Nayeli waited on the porch, rifle ready. Her expression changed to concern when she saw his blood-soaked bandage. "You're wounded," she said as he dismounted. "Just a scratch. We've got bigger problems." Inside, he spread the stolen documents and explained what he'd learned. This Blackwood has plans for the reservation. Something permanent. "They will poison our water, drive us off the land," Nayeli said, scanning the papers, "or kill us all." "We need to get these documents to someone who can act on them," Jake replied, wincing as Nayeli cleaned his wound. "That map you found proves they knew exactly where the contamination would flow." "We must stop them ourselves," Nayeli insisted. "Your white man's justice moves too slowly. My people will be dead before your courts act." Jake couldn't argue. He'd seen how the system worked, or didn't work, for Indians. "We need to hit them where it hurts," he agreed. "Shut down their operation, at least long enough for these documents to reach the right people." "The mine," Nayeli said, her voice hard with certainty. Jake nodded and opened his saddlebag, revealing sticks of dynamite he'd taken during his escape. "Borrowed these before I left town. Tomorrow night, we end this." The Silver Creek mine operated day and night, its stamp mills crushing ore in a constant, thunderous rhythm. Under cover of darkness, Jake and Nayeli approached from the western ridge, avoiding the main road. The mine complex sprawled across the hillside, shafts leading into the earth, ore carts on narrow tracks, processing buildings belching smoke, and a creek running through it all. That water now ran milky gray, tainted with mercury and arsenic. "That flows directly onto reservation land," Nayeli whispered, touching the street Christopher medal Jake had given her earlier, his father's, carried through the war. Jake nodded grimly. Office is in that two-story building. The sluice gates controlling the water flow are by that large shed. We'll need to split up. I'll take the waterway, Nayeli said, checking her revolver. When the charges blow, the contaminated water will back up into their own facility instead of flowing downstream. I'll find Blackwood, make sure he doesn't destroy more evidence. Jake checked his watch. Meet back here in 30 minutes. If either of us doesn't return, the other completes both missions, then gets out. Nayeli gripped his arm briefly, her eyes meeting his in the darkness. No words were needed. They both knew the odds. She disappeared into the shadows. Jake watched her go, then made his way toward the main office, keeping to darkness between buildings. He slipped through a side door. Inside, oil lamps cast yellow light across empty desks. He moved to the stairs leading to the second floor, where Blackwood's office would be. The upper hallway was deserted. A door at the end bore a brass plaque. Marcus Blackwood, General Manager. Jake drew his Colt and pushed the door open. A tall man in an expensive suit stood by the window. He turned, showing no surprise at the gun pointed at his chest. "Mr. Harmon, I presume," he said calmly. "Marcus Blackwood, I've been expecting you. You know who I am. The telegraph man who's become quite an inconvenience." Blackwood moved to his desk. "Whiskey?" He held up a crystal decanter. "You're poisoning innocent people," Jake said, keeping the Colt steady. "Children are dying." Blackwood shrugged. "Progress has its costs. The Apache should be grateful we're only taking their water, not their lives." He smiled coldly. "Though that may change, the government has been receptive to my suggestion of relocating them, permanently." "To where?" "Does it matter? They're savages, a dying breed. The future belongs to men of vision and industry." Jake felt a familiar coldness settling in his chest. "You won't get away with this." "I believe I already have." Blackwood sipped his whiskey. "You, however, have become quite a nuisance." Outside, a sudden commotion erupted. Blackwood glanced toward the window. "Ah, your Apache friend has been found." Jake lunged forward, knocking the glass from Blackwood's hand. The mine owner drew a derringer from his vest. The small gun discharged, the bullet grazing Jake's cheek. Jake tackled Blackwood into a bookcase. Books crashed to the floor as they grappled. The mine owner was stronger than he looked. He landed a punch to Jake's wounded arm, sending pain lancing through him. Jake delivered a sharp uppercut, feeling teeth give way. They crashed across the office, overturning the desk, smashing a lamp that sent kerosene spilling across the floor. Blackwood reached for a letter opener, slashing wildly. The blade caught Jake across the ribs. Jake seized the man's wrist, twisting until the makeshift weapon clattered to the floor. With his free hand, he delivered a crushing blow to Blackwood's jaw. The mine owner staggered backward. Jake aimed his Colt at Blackwood's chest. "It's over," Jake said, breathing hard. Blackwood laughed, blood staining his teeth. "Justice? There is no justice out here, only power and money. I have both." A tremendous explosion rocked the building. Nayeli had detonated the charges at the sluice gates. Contaminated water would now flow back into the mine's own facilities. "That would be the sound of your operation shutting down," Jake said. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. He reached behind a fallen bookshelf and produced a shotgun. Jake fired first. The Colt roared, and Blackwood stumbled backward, crimson spreading across his suit. He collapsed against the wall, shotgun falling from his grasp. "You've destroyed everything," he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "You did that yourself," Jake replied, gathering scattered documents. A second explosion shook the building. Fire alarms rang out. Jake headed for the door, but the hallway was filling with smoke. The kerosene from the broken lamp had ignited. He climbed onto a window ledge and jumped, landing hard on a roof below. Pain shot through his injured arm and ribs, but he pushed himself up and ran. The mine was in chaos. Men rushed in all directions, some fighting the fire, others fleeing. Water from the broken sluice gates gushed across the grounds. "Nayeli!" Jake shouted, scanning for her. "Nayeli!" A rifle shot rang out. Jake ducked as a bullet whizzed past. 3 men were advancing, mine security, weapons drawn. Jake returned fire, then sprinted toward ore carts for cover. One bullet found its mark, tearing through his thigh. He stumbled but kept moving. From his left came answering gunfire. Nayeli appeared from behind a processing shed, the Winchester blazing. 2 guards fell. The third turned but didn't make 3 steps before a bullet caught him between the shoulders. "The office is burning," Jake called as she reached him. "We need to go." She nodded, helping him to his feet. "You're hit." "I'll live. Did you get the sluice gates?" A fierce smile crossed her face. Water flows backward. Their own poison floods their mind. They made their way through chaos. A secondary explosion rocked the night as a processing building went up in flames. By the time they reached their horses, the entire complex was ablaze. The night sky painted orange and red. It looked like hell had opened in the Arizona desert. Jake's leg was bleeding badly. Nayeli tore a strip from her shirt and bound the wound tightly. "We have what we need," she said, patting his shirt where the documents were concealed. "Evidence of their crimes." Jake nodded, grimacing as he pulled himself into the saddle. "Let's go home." The aftermath came swiftly. Jake sent the stolen documents to contacts in the territorial government and the Army. Within days, federal agents arrived to investigate what remained of Silver Creek mining. The company's operations were suspended pending inquiry. Jake's wounds healed slowly. The bullet in his thigh had missed the bone but damaged muscle. He developed a fever that kept him bedridden for days, during which Nayeli rarely left his side. She treated him with herbs and poultices that drew out infection better than any doctor's remedies. One morning, as Jake sat on the porch, a delegation approached. Apache riders, led by a man in ceremonial dress. Jake recognized the chief of Nayeli's former tribe. He reached for his rifle, but Nayeli appeared in the doorway, placing a hand on his arm. "I will speak with them," she said. The chief dismounted and approached alone. "Daughter of our people," he said in Apache, then switched to English. "The spirits led us here." "What do you want, Nahilze?" she replied, voice cool. "We have learned the truth about the sickness that took our children. The government men came. They showed us papers from the mining company." He paused. "We were wrong to cast you out. The council asked you to return home." Nayeli's expression remained impassive. "You tied me to a stake, left me for the vultures." "Fear clouded our judgment," the chief admitted. "Now we seek to make amends." Jake watched silently, hand near his Colt. He'd seen enough to know that forgiveness came easier to those who'd done the wronging than those who'd been wronged. "The reservation will receive payment," the chief continued. "The water will be clean again. Your place in the tribe waits." Nayeli looked back at Jake, who met her gaze steadily. Something passed between them, an understanding built on shared blood and fire. "My place is no longer there," she said finally, turning back to the chief. "I have found a new path." The chief studied her, eyes moving to the street Christopher medal at her throat, then to Jake. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "Your spirit is strong, Nayeli. You have brought justice to our people, even after our betrayal." He extended his hand, offering a small carved eagle. "You will always be Apache, wherever you walk." Nayeli accepted the token with a slight bow. The delegation departed as silently as they had come. Jake rose, wincing as he put weight on his healing leg. "You could have gone with them, started over." She turned to him, the eagle carving in her hand. "That life is behind me now." Her eyes held his. "Unless you wish me to go." "No," he said simply, taking her hand in his. "I don't." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Jake unfolded a map of the Western Territories. "I've been thinking," he said. "This telegraph line is nearly repaired. Western Union will send someone else to finish it." "You would leave this place?" Nayeli asked. "Too many ghosts now." His finger traced northward. "There's bounty hunting work in Colorado. Wells Fargo is having trouble with stage robbers." He glanced up. 2 guns would earn twice the reward. A smile spread across Nayeli's face, not the fleeting ghost he'd seen before, but something real. Partners then. Partners, he agreed, equal share in whatever comes. They left the canyon the following week, riding north as autumn's first chill touched the air. Jake Harmon, former scout and telegraph man, carried scars on his body and in his dreams. Nayeli, outcast warrior and survivor, bore her own marks, burns that told a story of injustice and resilience. Behind them, the cabin stood empty. Ahead lay Colorado and whatever adventures the frontier might bring. And if their hands sometimes found each other by campfires under the vast western sky, neither felt the need to explain what had grown between them, a bond forged in fire, stronger than words could capture. In the mountains ahead, Marcus Blackwood's brother awaited, a wealthy man with a burning desire for vengeance, but that was a battle for another day. The thing about justice in this territory, Jake said as they rode toward the horizon, is that sometimes it needs people willing to stand against the tide. Nayeli nodded, the eagle carving and street Christopher medal hanging side by side around her neck. 2 worlds, 1 path, she said. Forward.